What I'm about to tell you isn't a coincidence. It's the reason everything in your life has been shifting lately. The version of you they used to know, the one who tolerated disrespect, who kept giving without being seen, who smiled just to survive, that version doesn't exist anymore. Allah's been quietly rewriting you in silence, in heartbreak, in hidden moments no one will ever witness. That's why certain people don't feel the same anymore. That's why familiar places now feel uncomfortable. It's not that you're lost, it's that you've outgrown the mask you once wore to feel safe. You're not broken, you're being rebuilt. You're not distant, you're being protected. You're not changing, you're returning to who Allah always meant you to be before the world taught you fear. Stay until the end, because this isn't just a reminder, it's a mirror for your soul. And by the time the story finishes, you'll finally understand why Allah had to hide you, silence you, and separate you just to bring you back to the version of you that was always real, always sincere, always His. Allah rebuilt you in silence, not in public. There comes a moment in your life when Allah quietly removes you from everything familiar. People stop calling, plans start collapsing, the noise fades, and suddenly it's just you and the silence. At first, it feels like rejection. You think, why is everything slowing down? Why do I feel left behind? But that stillness isn't a setback, it's a sacred pause. Because when Allah hides you, it's never to forget you, it's to rebuild what the world broke inside you. He pulls you away from the spotlight to fix what no one could see. The world saw your smile, but He saw your exhaustion. They saw your laughter, but He heard your heart breaking behind it. And so, out of love, He hid you. You thought you were being forgotten, but you were actually being protected. He was protecting your peace from the hands that kept wounding it, protecting your value from the eyes that couldn't recognize it, protecting your destiny from people who would have ruined it. That's why suddenly your world got quiet, your circle got smaller, your schedule got empty, and your nights got heavier. You didn't know it then, but every tear you cried alone was watering the soil of your future. Every heartbreak was breaking the version of you that was too small for the life Allah was preparing. You thought it was loss, but it was liberation. Because before Allah elevates you, He isolates you. He needed you to sit alone long enough to realize you were never truly alone. He needed to silence the world so His whispers could finally reach you. You started to notice things you once ignored, the peace of early mornings, the sweetness of quiet du'as, the beauty of not needing to be seen to be valuable. He was reprogramming your heart. The old you chased noise, the new you started chasing meaning. The old you wanted recognition, the new you wanted peace. The old you wanted attention, the new you just wanted Allah. That's the miracle of divine isolation. It doesn't destroy you, it delivers you back to who you were always meant to be. And so, while everyone thought you disappeared, you were transforming. You began to see life differently. Your patience deepened, your anger softened, your prayers got longer, and your heart started breathing faith again. The same silence that once scared you became your safest place. You realized the peace you were begging people for was only ever found in sujood. There were nights you couldn't even explain what was hurting. Nights you sat in the dark, too tired to speak, too heavy to cry, and yet, even in that silence, something holy was happening. Your heart was being reshaped. Your wounds were being rewritten. Your faith was being rebuilt from the ashes of your exhaustion. You didn't notice it, but every quiet breakdown was actually a private conversation with Allah. When no one else understood, He did. When no one else showed up, He did. And when you finally surrendered, when you stopped fighting to hold everything together, that's when He began to piece you back together, stronger, softer, and wiser. This is why you now walk differently. Not out of pride, but out of peace. Not because you're better than anyone, but because you've seen what happens when Allah takes over your story. You don't react the same way anymore. You don't chase closure. You don't explain your worth to people who don't value it. Because you've learned something priceless. Peace is not found in people's approval, it's found in Allah's presence. You've become calmer now, quieter, more careful with your energy. Not because you're cold, but because you've finally realized how sacred your soul truly is. You used to break your back trying to please everyone, but now you just want to please One, you used to run after noise, but now you run towards silence. You used to crave validation, but now you crave connection. And the beauty of this transformation is no one saw it happen, because it wasn't meant for them to see. Allah didn't rebuild you in public because they would have misunderstood the process. They would have questioned, doubted, interrupted. So He took you aside, just like a craftsman takes a precious jewel, and began refining you in private. Every tear was a tool. Every test was a polish. Every silence was a sign that He was still working on you. You were not being delayed. You were being developed. That's why when you reappear, you don't fit where you used to. Your old environment feels too small. Your old conversations feel shallow. Your old interests feel meaningless, because you've outgrown what once defined you. You're no longer who you were, and that's a sign of divine completion. The version of you that once begged to be seen now values being unseen. The version of you that chased people now waits patiently for Allah's timing. The version of you that tried to control everything now finds comfort in surrender. This is what silence does. It teaches you that nothing was ever lost. Everything was replaced with something purer, deeper, eternal. So if you're in that quiet season right now, don't rush to escape it. You're not being buried, you're being planted. And when the time is right, Allah will reveal the new you, the healed you, the peaceful you, the you that was worth hiding for a while. You'll walk out of that silence not needing to prove anything, not needing to explain anything, because your peace will speak for itself. The world won't understand what happened to you, but you'll know because you felt it. You lived it. You survived it. You were rebuilt, not in noise, not in public, but in divine silence. And that silence was never empty. It was filled with Allah's presence, working, healing, rewriting, until the new you finally emerged, stronger, wiser, and glowing with peace. The old you never knew existed. The version of you they broke was not the one Allah chose to keep. There was a version of you that tried so hard, tried to love correctly, tried to fix what was never yours to fix, tried to hold people who were already letting go. That version of you was gentle, hopeful, endlessly forgiving, but it was also tired of being the only one who cared. Tired of explaining sincerity to hearts that never intended to understand it. And one day, everything that version of you built came crashing down. Promises broke, friendships ended, love turned cold. And for a while, you couldn't recognize yourself anymore. You sat there wondering, why would Allah allow this? Why would He watch people hurt me when all I ever did was good? But the answer was never punishment, it was purification. Because the version of you that was shattered that day was not the one Allah intended to send into your future. He had to let certain people break you so that the pieces that didn't belong to you could fall away. He had to let the false versions of yourself die so the real one could finally breathe. The pain you felt was not rejection, it was replacement. It was Allah removing what was temporary to make room for what was eternal. Every heartbreak you thought ruined you was actually the hand of mercy reshaping you. Every disappointment was Him whispering, this is not your destination. Keep walking. You used to think healing meant going back to who you were. Now you know it means becoming someone new, someone softer, wiser, quieter. You began to notice that what used to excite, you no longer had the same shine. The conversations that once gave you life now drain your energy. The attention you used to crave now feels cheap. That's the sign of rebirth. The version of you they broke was fueled by emotion, not direction. But the one Allah is creating is led by peace, not need. You stopped asking, why did they leave me? And started whispering, thank you for removing what was blocking me. At first, it hurt unbearably. The nights were long and your pillow carried secrets only tears could translate. But those same nights became your turning point, because pain is a strange teacher. It humbles you, it quiets you, it empties you until all that's left to hold on to is Him. There was a time when you begged people to stay. Now you beg Allah to protect your peace. You used to run after closure. Now you pray for clarity. You used to chase understanding. Now you rest in acceptance. The version of you that kept reaching for others was meant to be broken so that you could finally reach for Allah. You see, Allah doesn't always take away to punish. Sometimes He takes away to prepare. He saw you giving love that was draining you. He saw you lowering your worth just to be chosen. He saw you accepting less because you feared loneliness. And he said, no more. So he allowed the heartbreak. He allowed the silence. He allowed the distance. Because without it, you would have kept clinging to the wrong story. When Allah loves you, He lets the false attachments hurt until you release them. He lets the illusion crumble so truth can stand. He lets you be misunderstood so you'll finally seek understanding from Him alone. And slowly, piece by piece, you began to realize what broke you was not ending your life, it was beginning your awakening. You started walking differently, not proudly, but peacefully. You no longer chase. You attract what is written. You no longer beg. You pray. You no longer fight for attention. You guard your energy. And the people who once drained you, they look at you now and don't recognize you anymore. Because the version of you they knew was built around them, and the version of you that exists now is built around Allah. You learned that being broken was never the end. It was the beginning of self-awareness, of surrender, of peace. The pain that cracked your heart open became the space where light entered. The loss that emptied your hands taught you how to hold on to faith instead of people. And the silence that followed every goodbye became the sacred place where Allah's voice finally echoed clearly. You realized that the more you lost, the more you were actually being found. Because every piece that fell away revealed another layer of your truth. The you that cared too much about opinions, gone. The you that settled for half love, gone. The you that confused attachment with loyalty, gone. What remained was purer, simpler, real. Isolation is the classroom of transformation. There are moments in life when suddenly everything becomes quiet. The friends you always talk to stop replying. The people you relied on become distant. Plans collapse one after another, and you're left sitting alone, wondering, what did I do wrong? It feels like life has pressed pause. Nothing moves, no one understands, and your heart starts whispering that maybe you're forgotten. But the truth is, you're not forgotten. You've just been enrolled in Allah's most sacred classroom, the classroom of isolation. He calls it separation. We call it loneliness, but heaven calls it transformation. You see, Allah doesn't grow your soul in crowds. He grows it in quiet. When too many voices surround you, you can't hear His. When too many opinions guide you, you forget the sound of your own conscience. So Allah, in His mercy, begins to clear the room. He removes the unnecessary noise, the half-hearted friendships, the endless distractions that kept you busy but empty. And at first, you panic because silence feels heavy when you're not used to it. You reach for your phone, your friends, your old habits, your old escapes, but nothing fills the emptiness anymore. That emptiness isn't a punishment, it's a lesson. It's Allah saying, now that it's finally quiet, can we talk? Isolation teaches what company cannot. It teaches patience because you can't rush what Allah is still writing. It teaches gratitude because you start noticing blessings you ignored. It teaches strength because you learn to stand on your knees before you stand on your feet. You start to see how dependent you were on people for comfort, how quickly you ran to them for answers instead of Him. And so Allah gently removes them, not to hurt you, but to prove that the peace you were begging others for was always one conversation with Him away. At first, you resist it. You scroll endlessly, trying to distract yourself. You overthink every message that never came. You replay every memory that once made you feel alive. But over time, the noise starts losing power. You begin to crave quiet mornings. You start feeling peace in things you never noticed before. The sound of birds, the calm of the sky before sunrise, the sweetness of saying thank you Allah with no reason except that you woke up. That's when you realize isolation isn't empty. It's full of unseen lessons, full of divine conversations, full of clarity. In that sacred stillness, you start discovering who you really are. Not the version that performs for the world, not the version that hides pain behind jokes, but the real you, the soul that feels, believes, and still hopes. You learn that you're not weak for needing time alone. You're wise for understanding that your peace is precious. You begin cleaning your heart the way others clean their rooms, sorting through emotions, forgiving quietly, letting go gently. Some days you cry for what's gone. Some days you smile because now you understand why it had to go. And that balance between mourning and understanding is where true maturity begins. The classroom of isolation is not graded by results. It's graded by transformation. Allah isn't watching how quickly you move on. He's watching how deeply you evolve. He watches you wake up at 3 a.m. whispering prayers you never said before. He watches you choose patience over panic, silence over arguments, faith over fear. Each quiet choice becomes a new page in your story. And soon you realize that the solitude you once hated is now your favorite teacher. Sometimes you ask, why did everyone leave at once? Because Allah knew you wouldn't walk away on your own. So He made them leave so you could finally meet Him alone. He didn't want you dependent on what was temporary. He wanted to anchor you to what's eternal. And in that emptiness, you begin to feel something holy, a companionship that doesn't text you but comforts you, a presence that doesn't speak out loud but fills the silence with meaning. That presence is Allah reminding you, I never left, I just needed your attention again. You start to change quietly. Your energy becomes softer, your words become slower. You listen more, complain less, and observe deeply. You used to rush through life, now you move intentionally. You used to react to everything, now you respond with calm. You used to beg people to understand you. Now you're content being misunderstood, because once you've sat with Allah in silence, you realize no human validation can compete with divine reassurance. The classroom of isolation doesn't teach through lectures, it teaches through moments. Moments when you finally stop fighting reality and start flowing with trust. Moments when you break down and feel peace right after. Moments when you smile for no reason other than knowing you're protected. You start realizing that maybe, just maybe, the loneliness you feared was actually the love of Allah in disguise. Growth offends those who benefited from your silence. There was a time when you stayed quiet just to keep the peace. You agreed when your heart disagreed. You smiled when your soul was breaking. You let things slide that were cutting you open from the inside. You thought silence was strength. You thought patience meant accepting disrespect. You believed that keeping everyone happy was the right thing to do. And for a while, people loved that version of you. The version that never said no, never complained, never demanded to be treated right. But one day, something changed. The same pain that kept you silent started to teach you. The same tolerance that once looked holy began to feel heavy. And Allah placed in your heart a whisper, you were not created to be walked on. You were created to walk toward me. That whisper grew into courage, and that courage became boundaries. When you finally began to heal, you noticed how uncomfortable your peace made others. The moment you said no to what once drained you, some people called you selfish. The moment you began choosing your mental health over their comfort, they said you changed. Of course you changed. You were supposed to. You started to realize that many people never loved you. They loved your silence. They loved how predictable you were, how easily you forgave, how quickly you said yes, how quietly you suffered. They were never attached to your heart. They were attached to their access. And when that access disappeared, so did their kindness. Growth exposes the motives around you. It shows you who was loyal to your peace and who was loyal only to their benefit. It hurts deeply to see people turn cold simply because you stopped shrinking. But that pain is part of purification. Allah removes the false connections one by one until only sincerity remains. So when they say you've changed, don't explain, don't argue, don't try to prove your goodness. Smile gently and whisper to yourself, Alhamdulillah, I grew. You start understanding that silence has two forms. One is sacred, the silence of patience and wisdom. The other is harmful, the silence of fear and exhaustion. You lived too long in the second one. You stayed quiet not out of strength, but out of survival. You thought that if you spoke, you'd lose people. But now you know the ones you lose by telling the truth were never meant to stay. So you start using your voice again. Not to fight, not to prove, but to free yourself. You start saying, this hurts, this is not right, this is not who I am anymore. And for the first time, your soul breathes. Growth doesn't always look graceful. Sometimes it looks like long nights, like shaking hands, like holding tears in your throat because you're choosing peace instead of pleasing. Sometimes it looks like deleting old numbers, walking away from conversations that go in circles, and unlearning the habit of explaining yourself to people who never listen. It's messy, but it's sacred. Because every time you walk away from what drains you, you're walking closer to what heals you. The people who benefited from your silence will never clap for your boundaries. They will call your peace arrogance. They will call your strength coldness. They will twist your clarity into guilt because they can no longer control a version of you that no longer exists. Let them. You don't need to defend your peace. Peace doesn't shout. It simply stays where it is welcome. And you've learned something beautiful. You no longer go. Where your peace is constantly interrupted, you start to notice how light you feel when you stop chasing people who make you question your worth. At first, the quiet feels strange. Your phone doesn't ring the same. The group chats go silent. The same faces that once surrounded you now look the other way. But slowly you realize that this emptiness isn't loss, it's space. Space for clarity, space for peace, space for new souls who don't demand your silence as proof of love. You begin to see the pattern clearly now. The more you honor your heart, the smaller your circle becomes. And that's not loneliness, it's filtration. Allah removes the noise so that truth can breathe. At first, you wanted to call everyone back. You wanted to fix the misunderstanding. You wanted them to know that your quiet wasn't anger, it was healing. But then you stopped because you understood that if they truly cared, they would have felt the difference between distance and peace. The lesson became clear. You can't explain your transformation to those who were never ready to grow with you. You can't force someone to meet the new you while they are still addicted to the old version who served their comfort. So you stopped explaining, you started preserving, you stopped performing. You started protecting. The world sees growth as rebellion. They see boundaries as disrespect. They see healing as arrogance. But that's because your light exposes their shadows. You used to take every accusation personally. Now you just smile and pray for them. Because when you know the truth of your intention, you no longer need public validation. Your peace is your proof. You realize that not every relationship deserves a confrontation. Some simply deserve your absence. Not every ending needs a speech. Some just need silence and a closed door. This is not bitterness, it's wisdom. It's the understanding that peace is not found in fixing people. It's found in fixing your connection with Allah. Then comes the beauty of transformation. Your anger turns into compassion. Your frustration becomes forgiveness. You stop wishing bad for those who hurt you because you finally see they were part of the lesson, not the destination. You learn to say thank you for the pain. Thank you for the betrayal. Thank you for the silence. Because without those things, you would still be shrinking to fit places you had outgrown. Now, when you hear your name in rooms you no longer enter, you just smile. Because you know who you are and you know who rebuilt you. Growth is not a straight line, it's a quiet spiral. Some days you feel powerful, other days you feel fragile. But even in the fragile days, you no longer collapse the way you used to. You bend, you breathe, you pray, and you rise again. You begin to enjoy your own company. You sit in cafes alone, walk in the rain without rushing, watch the sunset and whisper gratitude. You start noticing how the world looks softer when you stop seeing it through the eyes of pain. This is what real growth looks like. You don't need revenge. You don't need attention. You don't need to be understood. You just need to be aligned with peace. Some will still talk. They'll say you're too quiet now, too distant, too serious. But that's only because your silence reminds them of what they lost their power over you. And you've learned to pray for them without letting them back in. You've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean access. You've learned that healing sometimes requires holy distance. Now your life feels lighter. You spend more time in gratitude, less in justification. More time in reflection, less in reaction. You wake up with peace instead of anxiety. You go to sleep with gratitude instead of anger. This is growth, the invisible miracle that happens when you stop begging to be understood and start living to be guided. You understand now that every person who misunderstood you was a teacher. They showed you what you would never be again. They reminded you that your voice matters, your peace matters, and your silence has value when it's chosen, not forced. So when they whisper that you've changed, smile softly and let them talk. Because the truth is simple. You didn't change to impress anyone. You changed to protect what Allah restored in you. And that's why growth will always offend those who benefited from your silence. They thrived when you were quiet. They felt powerful when you were small. But the moment you began to honor the soul, Allah awakened. They saw you as a threat instead of a testimony. That's okay. You were never meant to stay in their comfort zone. You were meant to rise from it. So walk forward gently, without guilt, without apology, carrying the calm that once felt impossible. Let your silence now be sacred, not suppressed. Let your voice now be soft but truthful. And let your peace be louder than their opinions. Because growth, real growth, is when you no longer need to shout to be heard. You simply live in a way that your peace does the talking. What feels like distance is actually divine closeness. There comes a season when your heart whispers, why do I feel so far from everything I love? The people who once surrounded you seem quiet. The joy that once filled you feels dim. Even your prayers feel heavy on your tongue. You wake up and go through the motions, but inside, there's a stillness that feels unfamiliar. It's not sadness exactly, it's something deeper. Something you can't name, but it keeps asking, where did everyone go? And that's when Allah begins to teach you that what feels like distance is actually divine closeness. You used to measure love by presence, by who texted first, who called back, who showed up. But Allah teaches you to measure love by peace. He removes the noise, the constant motion, the endless conversations, so you can finally notice Him again. When everything slows, when the room empties, that's not abandonment, it's alignment. It's Allah taking your attention away from creation and guiding it quietly back to the Creator. The stillness that scares you now will soon become the silence you crave. Because that's where the heart heals. That's where the soul breathes. Sometimes you ask, why can't I feel Him like before? You remember the days when faith felt easy, when your heart lit up during prayer, when every word of remembrance brought tears. Now your heart feels numb, your dua feels dry. But this dryness is not distance, it's training. It's Allah teaching you to love Him with consistency, not emotion. Faith built only on feeling collapses when feelings fade. So He deepens it by testing its silence. Just like the sun doesn't stop shining when clouds appear, Allah's mercy doesn't stop reaching you when you can't feel it. The light is still there, you're just learning to trust it unseen. During this season, He teaches you subtle lessons. You learn that strength isn't always loud, that healing doesn't always happen in excitement, that sometimes the closest moment to Allah is the one where you sit in quiet confusion but still whisper, guide me. That whisper is love. That whisper is faith. That whisper is proof that distance is only an illusion. It's strange how Allah works with the heart. He removes everyone you used to rely on, then lets the silence feel unbearable until you finally say, it's just you and me now. And that's when peace begins to return slowly, softly, like dawn after a long night. You realize you never lost connection. You just outgrew the shallow ways you used to feel it. Before, you looked for signs in emotions. Now, you find them in patience. Before, you looked for love in people. Now, you find it in the quiet certainty that you're protected. When Allah draws you closer, He doesn't always do it through joy. Sometimes He does it through discomfort. He removes your distractions, your attachments, your easy escapes until your heart has nowhere left to run except back to Him. That's why isolation hurts at first. It's detox. Your soul is releasing everything that once replaced Him. It trembles, it aches, it grieves, but every tear shed in that cleansing becomes the water that nourishes your new peace. People around you may not understand this transformation. They might say, you're distant, you've changed, you're withdrawn, but they can't see the unseen world within you. They don't realize that you're learning to sit with the one who created the world. They're still chasing. You're not avoiding life, you're learning how to live it from the inside out. And that's something only solitude can teach. Soon, you start noticing little signs of mercy. Moments that seem ordinary but feel strangely divine. A random breeze that calms you. A line from a stranger that answers a prayer. A delay that saves you from something unseen. These are the quiet ways Allah says, I'm still here. You never left my care. You begin to breathe differently. You move slower, not out of exhaustion, but out of awareness. You finally understand that everything happens through Him, not despite Him. and you realize something profound. Allah never distances himself. He only deepens the lesson. He doesn't move away, he moves within. The distance you feel is not separation, it's the space he's creating for transformation. Just like a teacher steps back during the test, Allah sometimes goes quiet so you can apply what he already taught you. The silence isn't punishment, it's graduation. In the past, you begged Allah to make you stronger. He answered by making you still. You asked him to draw you nearer. He answered by removing distractions. You asked him for peace. He answered by taking you out of the chaos you called comfort. Every unanswered prayer was actually an answered one, just in a different language, a language of growth, solitude, and divine rearranging. And one day, you wake up and realize you no longer miss what left. You no longer crave what drained you. You no longer fear being alone, because alone with Allah has become your favorite place to be. After a while, you notice something subtle changing inside you. The restlessness that once woke you at night begins to soften. You no longer stare at the phone waiting for someone to remember you. You stop checking who watched your stories or who forgot your birthday. Your heart starts to breathe again, lighter, steadier. You find that the quiet isn't empty anymore, it's filled with presence, invisible but gentle and certain. You start talking to Allah while you cook, while you drive, while you walk, not with formal words, just simple honesty. Ya Allah, I'm tired. Ya Allah, help me keep my heart clean. And you feel peace reply inside you, a calm that doesn't need a voice. This is how closeness is born, not through noise, but through awareness. The same stillness that once felt like a cage now feels like a sanctuary. The silence that once hurt your ears now heals your mind. You realize that Allah was never absent. You were just surrounded by too many things to notice him. Now that everything else is gone, you finally see the mercy that was hidden behind the emptiness. One evening you sit by the window, watching the light fade from the sky, and a thought crosses your heart. Everything that left me led me back to you. That sentence alone carries enough peace to silence years of confusion. The truth lands quietly. Distance was never punishment, it was direction. It was Allah turning your face away from what could never fill you toward the only one who always can. You start walking through life differently. You notice how each delay saves you from rushing, how each disappointment protects you from illusion, how each pause becomes proof that nothing good ever arrives late. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop begging people to stay. You stop arguing with fate, and in that surrender, your heart finally finds rest. Because closeness to Allah doesn't look like perfection, it looks like trust. Trusting that every no hides a better yes, trusting that every silence hides a divine response, trusting that every ache hides a deeper kind of love. You begin to see the world as a conversation between you and Him. The sunrise feels like reassurance, the wind feels like comfort, the setbacks feel like lessons written just for you. Every ordinary moment becomes a reminder. He is here, He's listening, He's guiding. And the strange part is, nothing around you has changed, but you have. Your inner world is quieter, your thoughts kinder, your expectations gentler. You no longer rush to fix everything, you let life unfold with grace. One night you remember the version of yourself who cried to feel seen, who panicked when people walked away, who thought loneliness meant failure. You smile with tenderness, not shame, because that version of you was necessary. It was the bridge that carried you to this peace. You whisper, "Thank you, Allah, for every closed door that made me look up." And you feel tears again, not from pain this time, but from gratitude so deep it humbles you. Now, when prayers feel dry, you don't panic. You know that faith isn't about constant emotion, it's about consistent return. Even when you feel nothing, you still bow, you still speak, you still hope. And that effort itself becomes worship. You stop chasing spiritual highs. You start cherishing spiritual steadiness. Because closeness isn't measured by tears, it's measured by trust that never quits, even on the silent days. There will still be moments when your heart aches for connection. You're human, you were made to feel. But this time, instead of running to distraction, you run to dua. Instead of seeking attention, you seek intention. Instead of filling the gap with people, you fill it with remembrance. And little by little, the emptiness turns holy again. People will still say, "You've gone quiet." They'll miss the version of you that was always available, always entertaining, always present in every conversation, but you won't explain. Because you've learned that sacred things lose power when you overexpose them. Your peace is private now. Your growth is silent now. Your relationship with Allah is personal now. That's what real closeness looks like, when you no longer need the world to notice your connection with the divine. You begin to walk through storms with calm eyes. Not because life is easier, but because your heart knows who controls the wind. You pray and release. You work and trust. You hope and rest. That rhythm becomes your new heartbeat. You no longer measure your faith by how loud your worship looks, but by how gently your heart handles what it can't control. That's what divine closeness does. It replaces panic with patience, fear with understanding, and emptiness with meaning. And one morning, without realizing when it happened, you wake up peaceful. The silence that once frightened you now feels like home. You no longer chase after noise, because the quiet between you and Allah is louder than any crowd. You realize what you called distance was never distance at all. It was Him pulling you closer, softly, steadily, until all that was left in your heart was certainty, and that certainty whispers the sweetest truth. You were never alone, you were simply being drawn nearer in a way only the soul can understand. You don't owe the world the old you. There comes a day when you wake up and realize you've changed. Not the kind of change people notice on the outside, the clothes, the voice, the smile, but something deeper, quieter, sacred. You no longer feel pulled by the same noise. You don't laugh at the same jokes, don't fit in the same places, don't feel comfortable in the same company. And for a while, it confuses you. You keep wondering, what's wrong with me? But nothing is wrong with you. You're simply outgrowing the version of yourself that the world got used to. That old version of you said yes when the heart screamed no. That version apologized for existing too loudly. It carried guilt for wanting rest, for needing space, for dreaming bigger. It tried to be everything for everyone and ended up losing itself. So Allah, in His mercy, began to undo what the world built around you. He started peeling off the layers of people pleasing, the layers of fear, the layers of pretending you were fine. It hurt at first because every layer carried memories. But each time something fell away, you breathed a little easier. The heaviness that you thought was personality was actually pressure. The exhaustion you called normal was actually neglect. And once Allah showed you that truth, you could never unsee it. People don't like that kind of growth. They loved the version of you that never asked for better, that never questioned unfairness, that never said, I deserve peace too. So when you begin to change, they don't clap, they complain. They say, you've become distant. But what they mean is you've stopped shrinking. They say you've changed. But what they mean is we can't use you the way we used to. You used to carry other people's storms while drowning in your own. You used to listen for hours to their pain and silence your own. Now you've learned that empathy without boundaries is self-betrayal. And that's a lesson the old you could never accept. Growth feels lonely because you start to see everything differently. You hear conversations that once entertained you and now feel tired. You enter rooms that once felt warm and now sense their emptiness. It's not arrogance, it's awareness. Your soul is learning to recognize what doesn't feed it anymore. At first you try to go back to fit again, to blend again, to smile even when it burns. But every attempt feels heavier. Because once Allah upgrades your heart, the old environment can no longer hold it. You can't squeeze new peace into old patterns. You can't keep pretending the noise is meaningful once you've tasted silence with Allah. So you start saying no. At first it shakes you. The guilt feels like thunder in your chest. But soon that guilt turns into relief. You realize no is not rebellion. It's respect for your time, your energy, your purpose. You stop chasing explanations. You stop defending every choice. You stop proving your worth to people committed to misunderstanding you. The old you would have written essays trying to be understood. The new you simply smiles and walks away because peace is too expensive to waste on endless clarification. And that's when the whispers begin. You've become selfish. You've changed too much. You think you're better. But inside you know the truth. You've become peaceful, not prideful. You've become intentional, not indifferent. You've become faithful, not fearful. You're no longer performing, you're finally present. And not everyone will celebrate that, especially those who thrived when you were silent. In this new stage, you start learning the art of selective presence. You don't attend every argument you're invited to. You don't enter every battle that tries to prove your patience. You pick your peace like flowers, carefully, quietly, intentionally. You begin to live slower. You speak softer. You forgive faster. Not because life got easier, but because you finally learned that protecting your peace is part of worship. You used to think you owed the world an explanation for every boundary. Now you realize you only owe sincerity to Allah. Everything else is noise. The people who truly love you will understand. They'll adjust to your pace. They'll respect your quiet. But those who only loved your availability will vanish. Let them. They were chapters, not the book. They were lessons, not losses. You're not cruel for outgrowing people. You're simply listening to the voice inside that whispers, this is not where you belong anymore. And sometimes listening to that voice is the most spiritual act of courage you'll ever perform. The new you doesn't seek validation, it seeks alignment. You wake up asking not, do they like me, but does Allah like who I'm becoming? That single question changes everything. Because once you start chasing divine approval, human approval starts to feel small. Once you taste the calm that comes from pleasing Allah, the chaos of pleasing everyone else becomes unbearable. You stop rushing, you stop forcing, you let life unfold, knowing that whatever is meant for you will never need you to break yourself to keep it. The more time passes, the more natural your quiet becomes. You don't feel the need to explain why you prefer calm evenings to crowded rooms. You don't apologize for staying home, reading, thinking, praying. You no longer measure a good day by how much you impressed others, but by how peaceful your heart felt when you placed your head on the pillow. You start noticing how gentle your thoughts have become. The same mind that once replayed arguments now repeats gratitude. The same heart that once begged to be seen now smiles simply for being alive. You're not chasing, you're content. You're not waiting for approval, you're grateful for breath. There are moments when the old habits try to pull you back. A familiar voice calls. A memory tempts. A fear whispers you're missing out. But you pause and remember the cost of returning. You remember the exhaustion, the constant explaining, the nights spent proving your worth to people who could never see it. And you quietly say, no, thank you Allah, I've learned my lesson. You understand now that not every door deserves knocking again. Some doors close not because you failed, but because Allah loves you too much to let you go back to what breaks you. Every season teaches you something new. Solitude teaches you patience. Boundaries teach you respect. Peace teaches you discernment. You realize you don't need to be everywhere, doing everything, with everyone. Your energy is sacred. Your focus is worship. Even silence becomes dhikr when the heart is aware of. Who gave it? Peace. You begin to see growth in small, quiet ways. You speak kindly when others are harsh. You let go of arguments you could easily win. You pray for people who will never know it. That's the new. You're strong in softness, brave in restraint. And sometimes when you meet those from your past, you see the surprise in their eyes. They try the same words, the same guilt, the same pressure, but you don't react anymore. The buttons they used to press don't work now. You smile, wish them well, and move on. It's not coldness, it's closure. They look at you and see distance, but inside you know it's healing. They remember your old energy, eager, anxious, always giving. They don't yet understand this calm, centered version that Allah formed in silence. You start noticing beauty in simplicity. A cup of tea at sunrise feels richer than the noise of endless socializing. One sincere conversation feels heavier than 100 hollow compliments. A short prayer from the heart feels stronger than long speeches said for show. This is what it means to be rewritten. Allah didn't change your face, He changed your focus. He didn't alter your life overnight. He reshaped your priorities slowly, mercifully. Now you know that healing isn't loud. It's a quiet rearranging of what truly matters. You no longer chase closure from people. You seek completion from Allah. You no longer fight for explanations. You rest in understanding. When someone leaves, you whisper, If it was meant for me, it would have stayed. And then you pray for them not out of longing, but out of peace. That's what divine maturity feels like. Not revenge, not resentment, just release. You realize that the more you let go of the old you, the lighter you walk. The lighter you walk, the more space there is for light itself. Some nights you still miss pieces of your past. You think of old laughter, old places, old versions of yourself that used to dream differently. But even in nostalgia, you feel gratitude because you can finally love those memories without wanting to relive them. You can bless the road that shaped you without needing to turn back. You whisper, "Thank you, Allah, for taking me from who I was to who I'm becoming." And you realize that's the essence of growth, to remember your past without being ruled by it. Now your life has a different rhythm. You wake up slower, speak gentler, forgive quicker. You care less about being right and more about being kind. You listen more than you talk. You give, but not at the expense of your peace. You help, but not at the cost of your soul. And somehow, this calm feels unfamiliar but holy. You're not chasing the old excitement because this serenity is richer. It doesn't need noise to exist. It doesn't need validation to breathe. People still say, "You've changed." You smile because you know that's the point. Change is the sign that Allah's mercy touched your story. Change is the proof that your prayers worked. Change is the evidence that your silence was never wasted. You don't owe them the old you, the one who broke to make others comfortable, the one who laughed to hide the ache, the one who kept giving from an empty cup. That person was necessary for the lesson, but not for the next chapter. So you walk forward softly, grateful for the pain that shaped you, peaceful with the distance that protects you, hopeful for the future that awaits you. And if anyone asks, "What happened to the old you?" you can simply say, "She served her purpose. She taught me compassion. She carried me through storms. But now it's time for the healed me to live." You don't owe the world the old you. You owe your peace to the one who gave it back. And as long as your heart stays gentle, your boundaries firm, and your gratitude alive, you will keep walking in light, quietly, humbly, unshakably whole. They remember who you were, but Allah knows who you've become. There comes a point in every believer's life when the past begins to echo. Old friends, old mistakes, old versions of you, they all come back as memories, not to comfort you, but to question you. You hear your name spoken in the same tone people used when they didn't know your heart. You see your old photos, your old words, your old temper, your old habits, and you feel a sting of embarrassment that only growth can create. You tell yourself, "I've changed, I'm trying." But the world rarely lets you outgrow your past. People love to freeze you in the moments when you were weakest. It makes them feel safe. It gives them something familiar to talk about. They say, "You used to be this, you used to do that, you used to lose control." And sometimes they even laugh as if the you that's healing doesn't deserve respect because the you that stumbled once existed. It hurts not because you still crave their approval, but because part of you wants them to see the work it took to become better. You want them to see the nights you wrestled with guilt, the mornings you woke up determined to start again, the prayers you whispered when no one was watching. But they don't see any of that. They only see who you were. That's when Allah reminds you, they remember your history, I remember your effort. People hold on to evidence, Allah holds on to intention. They quote your past to define you. He rewrites it to refine you. He saw what no one saw. The moment your heart broke in repentance, the way you bit your tongue when you wanted to argue, the tears that never left your eyes but still reached His mercy. He saw the guilt that didn't let you sleep and the hope that wouldn't let you give up. Every apology you whispered to Him in secret became a brick in the new foundation of your soul. Every good deed you did quietly while the world was busy talking became a light only He could measure. That's the difference between human memory and divine knowledge. They remember your fall. He records your climb. When people talk about your past, they speak with finality as if you're still there, but Allah speaks about you with possibility as if you're still becoming. He doesn't say you were this. He says you can be more. He doesn't freeze you in mistakes. He frees you through growth. And that's why sometimes He allows your past to be mentioned, not to shame you, but to remind you of how far you've come. Every time someone brings up the old you, it's a chance to silently thank Allah for not leaving you there. growth is a quiet journey. The world loves loud transformations, public apologies, grand statements, dramatic proofs, but real change happens in silence. It happens in the decisions no one claps for, turning off the conversation that would have led to gossip, lowering your gaze when temptation feels close, forgiving someone who never said sorry, choosing prayer instead of pride. The world doesn't witness these moments. They see the results months later and call it sudden change. But you and Allah know the years of invisible effort behind it. Sometimes being remembered by your past feels like carrying an old photograph everywhere you go. No matter how clean you've become, someone will always hold up that picture and say, "This is you." But you've learned that photographs capture only light, not depth. They can show your face, not your heart. They can show a moment, not the journey that followed. And so you stop explaining. You stop wasting words on those who love the old story more than the new one, because you finally understand it's not your job to convince them. It's Allah's job to reveal you. He reveals you slowly, kindly, beautifully, not through applause, but through consistency. Not through people talking about you, but through the peace that surrounds you. You start noticing how calm feels more satisfying than being right. How walking away from arguments feels stronger than winning them. How silence tastes sweeter than endless explanation. These are signs that the new you is real, not performed, not temporary, but rooted, because fake change needs witnesses, real change only needs Allah. At times you'll revisit your past in your own thoughts. A word, a scent, a familiar place, and suddenly you're back there, remembering the version of you that made choices from fear, from hunger, from confusion. You'll feel a wave of regret. You'll whisper, "Ya Allah, I wish I'd known better." And in that moment, He writes another reward for you, for remembering with humility instead of pride, for using memory as medicine, not as punishment, for allowing the past to humble you, not to define you. Because remembering your flaws doesn't cancel your progress, it deepens it. The person who forgets where they came from risks arrogance. The person who remembers with gratitude walks softly, knowing that mercy, not merit, carried them here. You start to look at others differently too. Where once you judged, you now empathize. Where once you pointed fingers, you now extend hands. Because you've lived through your own rebuilding and you know how heavy change can be. You understand that behind every loud mistake is a quiet pain. Behind every sinner is a soul searching for peace. So instead of saying, "I'd never," you start saying, "I understand." That's when you realize you're not just changed, you're transformed. The old you wanted to be right, the new you wants to be kind. The old you reacted, the new you reflects. The old you argued to win, the new you listens to heal. And every time you choose mercy over memory, you walk further away from who you were, closer to who Allah always knew you could be. When you lie in bed at night, thinking of everything you've been through, you feel a quiet gratitude rise in your chest. Not pride, not arrogance, just relief. Because if people only knew how many storms you survived, they'd stop saying your name with pity and start saying it with awe. But you don't need them to know. You just need Allah to see, and He already does. He saw every tear that washed away the bitterness. He saw every apology you gave to the world that never gave one back. He saw the effort you made to stay soft when life kept trying to harden you. And He loved you through all of it, not because you were perfect, but because you kept trying. When the crowd moved on and the world stopped asking how you were doing, you quietly began again. No announcements, no New Year resolutions, no watch me speeches, just small steps, invisible to everyone except the one who writes every heartbeat into your story. Each dawn you rose with heavy eyes and whispered, "Help me start again." Each night you fell asleep, still carrying the weight of old mistakes, but a little lighter than the day before. That's how Allah rebuilds a soul, not in lightning strikes, but in tiny, merciful moments that no camera can capture. You learned that healing isn't a public project. It happens in hidden places, in the pause before you reply, in the breath you take before you judge, in the tear you hide when no one is watching. You stopped telling everyone about your pain because you realized they couldn't understand its language. Only Allah could. He understood the sighs between your words, the tremble behind your smile. He knew when you were pretending to be strong just so the world wouldn't worry. And even when your prayers felt empty, He still counted them as effort. Because sincerity doesn't need eloquence, it just needs truth. Every change began small. You smiled at people who once hurt you, not because they deserved it, but because peace deserved it. You prayed even when the heart felt dry, because you trusted that faith is a muscle, not a mood. You forgave yourself for the things you now understood differently. You learned to love the slow progress that no one praised, and Allah watched. He watched you fall and get back up. He watched you open your hands again after swearing you'd never trust. He watched you choose silence when anger would have been easier. He watched and He smiled, because this is the kind of change angels record with awe. People only see the end result, the calmer tone, the softer eyes, the new boundaries. They call it personality, not realizing it's survival. They call it maturity, not knowing it was mercy. But you and Allah know the miles you walked between guilt and peace. You remember the nights when you thought the story was over. You remember the moments you said, I can't do this anymore, and yet somehow woke up and did it again. That persistence, that stubborn little hope that refused to die was Him. He placed it inside you when everyone else placed doubt. There were days you looked at yourself and saw nothing worth loving, but Allah saw the seeds underneath the mess, patience buried under fatigue, sincerity buried under fear. He watered them through trials, trimmed them through loss, and slowly you began to bloom in ways you never planned. Now, when you look back, you can trace His fingerprints in everything. In the person who left, that taught you boundaries. In the job you lost, that taught you reliance. In the mistake that taught you humility. Every disappointment became a doorway, and every doorway led back to Him. Rebuilding doesn't look holy while it's happening. It looks like crying in traffic, like deleting messages, like walking away mid-sentence, because peace matters more than winning. It looks like breaking your own heart for the sake of your faith. But heaven calls those moments worship, because each time you choose patience over pride, you polish a piece of your soul. You start understanding that Allah never rebuilds you to make you impressive. He rebuilds you to make you sincere. The world claps for appearance. He rewards intention. And that's why your new life feels quieter but fuller. Fewer people, deeper meaning, slower pace, stronger heart. You begin to live from the inside out. Instead of dressing wounds with noise, you let silence heal them. Instead of proving your goodness to others, you prove it privately to Allah. You give more secretly, love more carefully, forgive more quietly, and little by little, peace stops being something you chase. It becomes something you are. There will still be days when the old pain knocks on your door, when shame whispers, maybe you haven't changed at all, but you've learned to answer gently, I'm still learning. And Allah is still patient. Because transformation isn't about never falling again, it's about knowing where to return each time you do. So you return again and again, not with fear this time, but with familiarity. The prayer mat becomes a friend, not a courtroom. You no longer come to apologize, you come to reconnect. That's when you realize the difference between guilt and guidance. Guilt drags you down, guidance pulls you home. People may never know how much rebuilding cost you, but Allah does. Every unseen effort is already written. Every tear is already counted. Every ounce of restraint already rewarded. You no longer need applause. You no longer crave witnesses. Because the one who saw you at your lowest is the same one who lifted you here. You didn't change. You returned to who you were meant to be. There comes a quiet season in life when you stop running. You don't chase. You don't defend. You don't explain. You simply breathe. You realize the entire journey was never about becoming someone new. It was about returning to someone you lost along the way. You were always meant to be kind. You were always meant to be calm. You were always meant to be close to Allah. The noise of the world just made you forget. And when He loved you enough to silence that noise, it felt like losing everything. But in truth, you were being guided back home. You see, you didn't really change. The anger left because peace finally felt safe. The bitterness faded because forgiveness began to taste sweet. The constant need to be understood disappeared because your heart learned to be witnessed by Allah alone. People look at you and say, you've changed. But you know better. You didn't become someone new. You finally became who you were always meant to be before the world wounded you. You remember how the journey began, the heartbreaks, the betrayals, the moments that made you doubt your worth. Back then you thought those moments were the end of your story, but now you see they were sacred beginnings. Every disappointment was a door that redirected you to yourself. Allah was never taking things away to punish you. He was peeling away what didn't belong to your soul. He was saying, this isn't you, this isn't peace. Come back to what I created you for. Return doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow awakening. You start to notice how your heart reacts differently now. You no longer crave noise, you crave sincerity. You no longer chase people, you chase purpose. You no longer ask, who likes me? You ask, who brings me closer to peace? That's how Allah restores His servants, not by changing their hearts overnight, but by changing what their hearts are drawn to. There was a time you mistook chaos for excitement. The constant drama, the endless proving, the loud friendships that filled your days, you called that living. But now you know peace is louder. Peace doesn't shout, it steadies. Peace doesn't demand attention, it deepens presence. You used to think silence was emptiness, but now silence feels sacred because that's where you hear guidance. That's where your heart finally says, I remember who I am. Sometimes you still meet people from your past. They speak to you as if you're still the same person they once knew. The one who laughed too loud, worried too much, gave too easily. You smile, not out of arrogance, but out of understanding. They're speaking to a memory. They're speaking to someone who no longer exists. You don't defend it anymore. You let them hold on to their version of you while you quietly live your truth. Because you've learned that clarity doesn't need an audience. Returning to yourself feels different than becoming new. It feels like shedding borrowed skin. It feels like stepping out of noise that never belonged to your frequency. It feels like breathing your own air again after years of suffocation. You realize how often you adapted to survive, how you spoke softer than your heart wanted, how you smiled when you were breaking, how you stayed where your soul wanted to leave. And you forgive that version of you because she was doing her best with the light she had. Forgiving your old self is part of the return. You can't carry shame into peace. It's too heavy. You thank your past self for carrying the pain long enough for you to heal it. You whisper, you kept me alive until I remembered who I am. That's what growth really is. It's gratitude for the versions of you that didn't give up. Then something beautiful happens. You begin to see your life not as mistakes and detours, but as divine choreography. Every wrong turn led to revelation. Every heartbreak trained your compassion. Every delay protected your destiny. You realize you were never lost. You were being rerouted to authenticity. When you walk through your days now, you carry a peace that confuses those who still live in performance. You no longer crave loud recognition because quiet truth feels richer. You no longer measure worth by how much you do, but by how softly you move through what's already written. That's the power of return. You start living from acceptance, not anxiety. You wake up knowing that you don't have to earn the right to exist. You already belong, simply because He made you. And that awareness changes everything. You stop begging people to stay. You stop chasing explanations. You stop fearing endings. Because the moment you understood that nothing that leaves you can take what's written for you, you finally rested. Rest is what? You were always seeking beneath the chase. Not the rest of laziness, but the rest of surrender. That calm knowing that says, I don't need to control what's in Allah's hands. That's when gratitude returns like sunlight after a storm. You start thanking Him for the things you once complained about. You start smiling at memories that once made you cry. You start understanding that the purpose of pain was not to break you, but to bring you back to the truth. You were always enough when you were sincere. You begin to look at the world with softer eyes. The same streets, the same sky, the same faces, yet everything feels new, not because the world has changed, but because your heart finally has. You no longer rush to fix everything. You've learned that some things heal only when left in Allah's hands. You don't argue with fate anymore, you listen to it. You don't fight every ending, you trust that even endings are forms of mercy. Every time life slows you down, you no longer call it delay, you call it protection. Every time a plan falls apart, you no longer call it failure, you call it direction. Your heart now recognizes what your ego once resisted. Before you wanted control, now you crave connection. Before you sought attention, now you seek alignment. Before You demanded answers. Now you are content with presence. That's what happens when a soul remembers its source. It stops wrestling with the script and starts resting in it. You notice that you walk differently now. You carry peace like a secret. You speak slower, listen deeper, breathe easier. You still care, but not at the expense of your calm. You still give, but not at the cost of your soul. You still love, but from fullness, not from fear. And when people question the quietness in you, you smile and let them wonder. They call it distance. You know, it's depth. They call it coldness. You know, it's clarity. They call it pride. You know, it's prayer. The return to your true self is not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming unshakable. Life still tests you. People still misunderstand you. But the difference now is that you don't lose yourself inside those tests. You bend, you breathe, you trust, and you rise again. You no longer drown in what you can't control. You float in trust, knowing that the one who carried you through the darkest nights will carry you through every sunrise that follows. There was a time you thought being soft made you weak. Now you understand softness is not weakness, it's strength under surrender. It's being gentle in a world that tried to harden you. It's keeping your faith when cynicism would be easier. It's choosing love without losing boundaries. That's the you that Allah was always calling back to. Not the perfect you, but the peaceful you. Not the untouchable you, but the sincere you. Not the loud performer, but the quiet believer. Sometimes, late at night, you look at old pictures and whisper gratitude. Not for how you looked, but for how far you've come. You remember the heaviness behind those smiles, the storms behind those achievements, and you realize Allah was carrying you even then. He was there in every heartbreak that taught you to turn to Him. He was there in every silence that forced you to reflect. He was there when you felt forgotten, quietly rewriting your story while the world slept. Now, when life surprises you, you don't panic. You simply say, He knows. Because you've tasted what it's like to be held by the unseen. You've lived enough to trust His timing over your own. You stop running from discomfort. You start seeing it as divine construction. You start believing that every hardship is simply Allah whispering, I am still shaping you. As you live this new chapter, you notice that your peace begins to influence others. People sit beside you and calm down without knowing why. Your presence carries quiet. Your words carry weight. Not because you're special, but because you carry something the world is starving for: stillness. You no longer need to preach change, you embody it. You no longer need to prove faith, you live it in kindness. You no longer need to announce peace, you walk in it. That's what return does. It turns your life into silent da'wah. It turns your calm into a reminder, your patience into a message, your smile into a bridge between hearts. And through it all, you keep remembering this peace wasn't born from perfection. It was born from surrender. It was born from nights of confusion and days of endurance. It was born from trusting Allah when logic gave up. So now, when people say, you've changed, you whisper to yourself, no, I finally remembered who I was. You remember the child who believed easily, who spoke kindly, who smiled freely, who saw beauty in small things. You remember the innocence the world tried to bury, and you resurrect it with faith. There is a strange calm that arrives when you stop fighting what's written for you. It doesn't mean you stop caring, it means you stop fearing. You've realized that no one can take what is meant for you, and nothing can reach you unless He allows it. That understanding frees you. You start walking lighter through life, not because life is suddenly easier, but because you've stopped dragging resistance behind you. You used to move with constant tension, trying to predict outcomes, trying to force timing, trying to control perception. Now you simply do your part and release the rest to Allah. It's not laziness, it's trust. It's not detachment, it's peace. You begin to see people differently too. You don't expect perfection anymore. You know, everyone is fighting their own unseen battle. So instead of asking, why are they like this? You start asking, what pain might they be carrying? The world hasn't suddenly become kind, but your heart has become patient. You forgive not because they deserve it, but because you deserve freedom from the bitterness that used to chain you. Forgiveness no longer feels like weakness. It feels like strength, quiet, graceful, unwavering. You realize that Allah didn't bring you this far to turn you cold. He brought you here to teach you the difference between walls and boundaries. Walls block love. Boundaries protect it. Walls are built from fear. Boundaries are built from wisdom. You no longer isolate out of pain, you withdraw out of peace. You protect your energy not because you hate people, but because you finally understand that not every environment can hold your softness. And that's okay. Some people were sent only to wake you up, not to walk with you. You stop seeking closure from the past. You've learned that some goodbyes are meant to echo. Not every door has to be slammed shut. Some just fade quietly into silence. And in that silence, you find serenity. You stop expecting apologies that may never come. You stop waiting for explanations that won't make sense. You let it be because you've tasted the relief of surrender. You finally understand that peace is not found in perfect endings, but in trusting that every ending still leads to Allah. The version of you that's returning now doesn't compete anymore. You've learned that comparison kills gratitude. You don't measure your worth against what others have. You measure it against how close you are to contentment. Success for you now is not a number, not a title, not applause. It's waking up with a heart that doesn't envy and sleeping with a heart that doesn't hate. It's smiling at someone else's blessing, knowing yours will arrive when the time is right. That's the kind of success heaven measures. Your prayers begin to change too. They're less about asking and more about thanking. Less about why me and more about guide me. Less about fixing things outside and more about strengthening what's within. You start realizing that dua isn't just about getting what you want. It's about becoming who Allah wants you to be through the asking. It's about the softening that happens when your heart kneels again and again until it learns that surrender was the answer all along. You also notice something beautiful. Your presence becomes safer for others. You no longer react out of ego. You respond out of empathy. You listen without preparing your defense. You love without expecting perfection. People feel at peace around you. Not because you do everything right, but because you carry peace inside you. And peace is contagious. You used to speak to impress, now you speak to heal. You used to want to be seen, now you want to be sincere. You used to pray for the world to notice you. Now you pray for the world to notice Allah. That's what return does. It purifies intention. You begin to enjoy the smallest blessings again. A quiet morning, a warm cup of tea, a heart that wakes up without anxiety. A day where nothing dramatic happens and you whisper, Alhamdulillah, this calm is everything I once begged for. You start seeing miracles in moments you once overlooked. The fact that you still have breath. The fact that you still have faith. The fact that you survived what once looked impossible. You realize these are not small things. These are daily proofs that Allah never left you. And though you're softer now, you're stronger too. Strength doesn't look like never breaking. It looks like breaking and still choosing kindness. It looks like crying and still showing up. It looks like being afraid and still trusting. People ask, how do you stay so calm? You smile because you know the truth. You're not calm because life is easy. You're calm because you've been broken enough times to know that every fall still ends in His mercy. You begin to move through life with humility. The old you wanted recognition, the returning you wants redemption. The old you wanted to be understood, the returning you just wants to be forgiven. And so every day you quietly whisper, Ya Allah, make me who you see when you're merciful, not who they see when they're judgmental. That's all you want now, alignment with His view of you. The closer you grow to your true self, the more detached you become from worldly noise. Trivial conversations bore you. Gossip feels heavy. Arrogance feels foreign. The heart that once craved attention now craves seclusion. You spend more time alone, not lonely, but aligned. Because solitude isn't the absence of people, it's the presence of peace. And in that quiet, you feel Him everywhere. In the sound of the wind, in the warmth of the sun, in the stillness of your breath, you realize He was never far. You were just too distracted to notice. Your old self thought spirituality meant grand gestures. Now you understand it's in the ordinary how you greet others, how you spend your money, how you handle disappointment, how you forgive quickly. The return teaches you that righteousness is not loud, it's consistent, it's not dramatic, it's disciplined, it's not for show, it's for sincerity. And this quiet, simple, disciplined version of you is the one Allah had written all along. And now you see it, don't you? Everything you thought was breaking you was really building you. Every silence, every goodbye, every tear that no one saw was part of a conversation between you and Allah. They remember your mistakes, they remember your weakness. But Allah, He remembers the night you whispered, "Guide me." He remembers the moment your heart softened instead of hardening. He remembers the time you forgave when you could have walked away. That's who you are now. That's who you were always meant to be. You didn't lose yourself. You found the version of you that lives in peace, not performance. You didn't change. You finally came home to the soul He was shaping in silence. So don't ever let them make you feel guilty for growing. Don't shrink to fit their memory. The old you served its purpose. The new you is serving your destiny. And if you ever forget who you're becoming, just sit quietly, close your eyes and breathe. Because the same Allah who rebuilt you once is still rewriting you every single day, gently, patiently, lovingly. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. You are simply becoming the version He saw long before the world ever did. So walk gently now, not with fear, but with faith. Because the version of you they knew no longer exists. And the one that stands here today is exactly who Allah always meant you to be.